From Thom Hartmann's Daily Take Substack. Moral Cleansing, American Style. How the Supreme Court just outsourced cruelty. When cruelty is moved out of sight, it's easier to pretend it doesn't exist, until history writes it down in blood. Published June 25, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
They wear their robes like armor, from the bench they cast their spell. 6 hands raised in silence, and they banished hope to hell. No crime, no judge, no jury, just a passport stamped in shame. Send them where the sun don't rise and no one knows their name. It's moral cleansing, American style, where cruelty gets buried under legal files. You don't need a gun when you got a plane, and due process dies without leaving a stain. Oh, it's clean on the surface, washed in denial. That's moral cleansing, American style. They say it's not our problem when the bodies hit the ground. In countries torn by fire, where justice can't be found, build your walls with paper, hide the razor in the smile. Export the suffering and pretend it's all worthwhile. It's moral cleansing, American style. Out of sight, out of court, out of mind by miles. You don't need a camp when you've got a map to erase the name and close the trap. Truth don't scream when it's in exile. That's moral cleansing, American style. The robes are black, the hearts are too. They rewrite law to look brand new. But every tyrant finds a stage where silence masks the deepest rage. And when they come for one, they come for all. You just don't hear the warning call. History don't repeat itself, but it sure can hum the tune. When conscience is a shadow that disappears by noon, a flight to nowhere's cheaper than a trial fair and just. And power always gambles that the people won't mistrust. It's moral cleansing, American style. No bullets, just a bureaucratic exile, where freedom's ghost gets quietly sold, and justice bleeds while the engines roll, wrapped in a verdict and filed with a smile. That's moral cleansing, American style.
The American people just got a taste of authoritarianism wrapped in judicial robes. In a stunning 6-3 ruling this week, the Supreme Court greenlit the mass deportation of immigrants, not to their home countries, but to third nations where they have no legal status, no family, and often no hope. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, calling the shadow docket ruling, quote, inexcusable, end quote, pointed out how destructive this is to the rule of law. Both U.S. and international law largely prohibit this, and to the lives of the people who may be deported without due process. Quote, the government has made clear in word and deed that it feels itself unconstrained by law, free to deport anyone, anywhere, without notice or an opportunity to be heard. The episodes of noncompliance in this very case illustrate the risks. The Due Process Clause represents, quote, the principle that ours is a government of laws, not men, and that we submit ourselves to rulers only if under rules. By rewarding lawlessness, the court once again undermines that foundational principle. In matters of life and death, it is best to proceed with caution. In this case, the government took the opposite approach. It wrongfully deported one plaintiff to Guatemala, even though an immigrant judge found that he was likely to face torture there. Then, in clear violation of a court order, it deported 6 more to South Sudan, a nation the State Department considers too unsafe for all, but its most critical personnel, end quote. This ruling by 6 corrupt Republican justices allows Donald Trump or any future president to designate any country they choose as a, quote, safe third country, end quote, and deport people there without meaningful review, even if they've committed no crime and have a valid asylum claim. If that sounds familiar, it should. It echoes one of the most cold-blooded decisions made by Hitler's Nazi regime to locate their extermination camps not within Germany, but in the foreign lands of occupied Poland. Let's be clear. Deportation is not genocide, but both decisions, then and now, are grounded in the same logic, the moral evasion through geographic displacement. When regimes want to commit acts that would stir conscience or provoke backlash at home, they find ways to outsource the cruelty. The Nazi leadership understood that while Germany's public had been bombarded with anti-Semitic propaganda for years, they still might balk at the wholesale slaughter of millions of people inside German borders. So they built Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec far away, deep in Poland, where there were no German newspapers, no prying eyes, and no courts to second-guess their machinery of death. As Raul Hilberg and other Holocaust historians have documented, Nazi leaders like Himmler and Heydrich made this decision deliberately to preserve the illusion of, quote, moral cleanliness, end quote, at home, while carrying out genocide abroad. Today's Trump's version of this practice is more sanitized, but no less cynical. By permitting the U.S. government to deport asylum seekers and non-criminal undocumented immigrants to random third countries, often places they've never even set foot in, the Supreme Court has granted an executive branch a license to erase moral responsibility. As long as the suffering happens somewhere else, we're told, it's not our fault, it's not our soil, it's not our responsibility. That kind of logic is the death of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. As federal judge Patricia Millett said of Trump's deportation of Venezuelan prisoners into a concentration camp in El Salvador, compared with FDR's actions in World War II, quote, Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemies Act, end quote. The Trump administration argued, and the court on the take, Republicans appointed majority agreed that immigrants have no right to American judicial process once they're transferred elsewhere. In other words, we can dodge our legal obligations under both United States and international law simply by putting someone on a plane. This is the same loophole thinking that allowed George W. Bush's administration to kidnap terror suspects and ship them to places like Egypt and Syria, where they were tortured out of view. That policy was called, quote, extraordinary rendition, end quote. Today, we might call this new policy extraordinary rejection, a way to deny asylum without confronting its human cost. And here's the really chilling part. Once someone has been deported to a third country, they're functionally outside the U.S. legal system. They can't sue. They can't appeal. They may not even survive. And to Trump's delight, it's all be outside of the reach. It'll all be outside the reach of American courts and U.S. media. This obscene policy isn't about safety. It's about displacement as punishment and the creation of a pseudo-legal infrastructure of indifference to the humanity of the people we're, quote, processing, end quote. Whether it's a camp outside Krakow or a deportation center in Guatemala. The strategy is the same. Create a zone of moral invisibility, a legal no man's land where acts that would outrage decent people become routine because they happen far away beyond the reach of media, law, and conscience. That's not how democracies behave. That's how authoritarian regimes insulate themselves from dissent. And like all authoritarian tools, once it exists, it'll be used again. You may think this only affects immigrants, but consider the legal precedent now exists for the government to forcibly remove someone from U.S. soil and drop them in another country without due process. Today, it's asylum seekers. Tomorrow, who knows? A future president with dictatorial ambitions could cite this ruling to round up political dissidents, journalists, or whistleblowers and ship them off to, quote, safe third countries, end quote, that are anything but. You think that's paranoid? So did people in 1932 Berlin. The genius of the American system, at least in theory, is that it puts checks on state power. The executive cannot act like a king. The courts must protect the vulnerable, and the public must have visibility into the actions done in our name. This week, though, the Supreme Court abdicated that rule, and in doing so, the 6 Republicans on the bench handed a dangerous tool to a man most inclined to abuse it. Let's not kid ourselves. The decision wasn't just about deportation. It was about moral laundering, washing the blood off our hands by putting it on someone else's tarmac. The Nazis did it, so did the Bush administration. Now Trump's backers on the court have opened the door once more. History doesn't repeat, but, as Mark Twain said, it rhymes. And if we're not careful, we may soon find that rhyme turning into a full verse we've heard before.